Hallo Leute, welcome back to the history of Schalke. I hope you enjoyed the first episode, New Beginnings, talking about the origins of Schalke 04 from 1904 when it was created through 1920. So this is actually going to be the Roaring 20s. We're going to talk about 1920 to 1930. Let's get into it. So before we get into this video, I wanted to bring up this disclaimer that I meant to bring in last episode, but I didn't get a chance to or I forgot, I should say. And this disclaimer is this. Anything before World War II, in terms of finding footage or historical documents, has been hard to find, especially the photos. Because of the two world wars, World War I and II, lots of things were destroyed in both those wars. And so it's been hard to find footage and documentation, photos especially, of that time period. You know, even reaching out to the club, it was hard to find a plethora of photos to share with you guys because, again, things got destroyed during the world wars. But we were managed to find some things both through the club and through many different venues, which we will definitely going to credit them in the links below. So that was very helpful. I wanted to just bring out the disclaimer because, you know, these first 3 episodes, while we're gonna have lots of footage and great stuff for you to watch, it could have been a lot more. But, you know, obviously the wars happened and, you know, things got destroyed. So it is what it is. But as the decades go on, we'll have more and more, obviously. So that little disclaimer I just wanted to throw out there for everybody here. So last episode we started about the origins, right? 1904, the club was founded by some youngsters all the way up through 1920. While there was no real trophies or anything really to talk about in those first 16 years, a lot of things happened with the club. Started getting really developed. Obviously, they went through different amalgamations, joining different gymnastics clubs and trying to really get their foot in the ground and get their foot running, right? And so when we get to 1920s, that's when you really started seeing the club really take off. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first event I'd like to highlight happened in 1920. During this year, Hans and Fred Baldwin, their parents had immigrated to England from Germany before World War I. But then they were deported from England back to Germany, and they settled in Gelsenkirchen, right, where they were reacquainted with Fred Kuhn, a good friend of them who had been a captive during World War I in England. So the friend Kuhn convinced the players to, you know, join their club, and the club was Schalke. Because the brothers had grown up in England, you know, they kind of taught their new teammates, I should say, this style of play, model on the short Scottish passing game that kind of became popular in parts of England. So when the club took it over, this style kind of was turned into the Schalker Kreisel, or the spinning top. It is now known in English, at least in English language, right? That's really where the spinning tops name came from, the Schalker Kreisel. So in the early part of the 20s, the Roaring 20s, two of the more prominent players of the 20s were Fritz Szepan and Ernst Kuzorra. The latter started during his youth ranks of Schalke as a 14-year-old, right? This is back in 1919, and continued to work in the mine for a few years, even after making his team debut in 1925. The new club, Schalke, finally won its first honors. It took them several years. In 1923, when it was actually the first time they were crowned champions of the Schalke Kreisliga. It was around this time that Schalke picked up their nickname of the Kanappan. That's what we all call them now, right? One of the many nicknames we call them now. And this comes from an old German word for miners, if you didn't know, because the team drew many of its players and supporters from the coal miners of the Gelsenkirchen region, and we all obviously know that because we're the coal miners, right? And all the celebrations is about the coal miners, and especially with the last coal mine being closed down here in the recent years. It's always been a strong relation with the club, and that's why the blue collar origins really derive from. So we talked about all the amalgamations that happened in the first 16 years. On January 5th, 1924, the club officially became Fußballclub Schalke 04. The 04 was a reference to the club's founding year of 1904. You all knew that, obviously, right? If you didn't, now you know. And then in 1924, the football club finally parted ways with the gymnastics team once again, this time taking the club chairman along with them, and adopted the now familiar blue and white kit from which their second name would derive, the Konings. So that happened in 1924. The following year, the club became the dominant local side, based on this style of play with a short, sharp man-to-man passing, moving the ball. This system was indeed the Schalker Kreisel, the spinning tops, they've been using, perfecting really from all the previous years. So up to this point, 4 or 5 years now, they've been perfecting this, and now it's starting to really take shape and dominating the leagues. The final update of the club's name came in 1927, actually, when the club decided to build its own stadium, the Glücke auf Kanappan. The city of Gelsenkirchen helped the club with friendly land for the stadium and loan terms, and as a thank you, the club added the city's names to its official name to become Fußballclub Gelsenkirchen Schalke 04. In an era with a much more modest transfer market than we see nowadays, the Schalke club of the 1920s was allowed to slowly gel and perfect its distinctive tactics, the Schalker Kreisel, the spinning tops, and really after some criticism, people were saying that it's an overgalloping approach, it lacks sharpness. By 1927, their dominant spinning top system carried them into the top flight of the Gauliga Ruhr in the league championship, which they won that year, and then in the opening rounds in the national finals. So the club really started to gain into the spotlight throughout the country, not just in their regions. It's quick passing that no one could really contain because they really hadn't seen much of it in Germany before. And now that they've had 7 years at this point to perfect the system, it was a well-oiled machine, and you could see that with the results they were starting to get, especially going up to the top flight, the Gauliga Ruhr. So the league championship and then jumping into the opening rounds and national finals, it was a huge accomplishment for the club at that point. It wouldn't stop there, right? It kept getting bigger and bigger. And then by 1929, Schalke had won 3 regional championships in a row and were crowned the West German champions for the first time. The system that people couldn't contain, the beautiful system to watch and scoring all these goals, it got them the West German championship. It was a huge accomplishment. Unfortunately, though, the following year, Schalke were sanctioned for exceeding salary levels set by the league, and in an era that considered professionalism in sport, the league found this very, very repugnant, and they banned Schalke for play for almost a half a year, really. It was a big hit to the club for a team that was gaining such popularity, such dominance, and then got hit for overpaying their players, breaking the league rules, which they had, obviously, the maxims allowed. We all know, or most of us know, that the Bundesliga wasn't founded until 1960s, right? But before this, German championships were decided each year with a playoff tournament within the regional champions. So in the 1929 edition, Schalke did beat Wacker Leipzig in the last 16, but then they ended up losing to Hertha in the next round in the quarterfinals. The very next year, they would reach the same stage, but then they ended up getting banned from competitive football for a year that we talked about for breaking the rules and amateurism with illegally paying players, or excessive amounts of payments, I should say. And really, this became an indication of the kind of wealth that the mines provided. It was a very solid base for the club to compete for national honors for years to come. The 10 years we're talking about here, 1920 to 1930, the Roaring 20s, you saw the spinning top, Schalker Kreisel really perfect this, build this style of play, get used to it, and then it became like second nature to them, and they were dominating clubs because no one could stop them. And like you said, they won the West German Championship, they won 3 regional titles in a row. They started getting national prominence, and then because of this prominence, probably people started paying attention to them more and realized, hey, they're paying their players a little too much. So that's why they got the ban. But though it was a salty and bitter way to end that great era there, what would come would be even better, grander things. The championships that we all talk about all the time came from the upcoming era come here, starting in the 30s. So that was the Roaring 20s. We hope you enjoyed that segment. There's many more episodes to come from this. We'll try to keep this going on a weekly basis. But yeah, 1920s, 1930s. Obviously, the next episode coming up is the 30s through the 40s. Should be a lot of good times to talk about there. So maybe not. We'll see, I guess. Thank you again. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the page, leave comments, let us know how we're doing. SchalkeMerica is obviously a podcast. We stream weekly on all social media: YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Well, maybe not Instagram, Facebook. So we stream that, and the podcast can be found anywhere: Stitcher Radio, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spotify, you name it. We are there with the podcast. So make sure you tune us in each week, and then check back, hit the notification button so you can catch the very next episode, which we'll be posting every week, like I said. So episode 2 is wrapped up. Hope you've enjoyed, and we'll catch you soon. Glück auf.